backside of the head that there's an increase in the risk of brain cancer. Now, so based on that evidence, 3 years ago, the World Health Organization declared radio frequency electromagnetic fields to be possible human carcinogens. Well, what about all these other forms? Well, much less consistent information, but the information is growing. And let me talk a little bit about the syndrome of electrohypersensitivity. Electrohypersensitivity is that some people are very sensitive to radio frequency waves, and they get ill if they're around them. And many people are so sensitive that they can't stand to live in our everyday environment. Let me give you an example of one experience that I had that really convinced me that this is real. I've had phone calls and emails from people for years reporting that they're electrosensitive, and they go to their doctor and they refer them to the local psychiatrist. It's probably true that some people that say they're electrosensitive really aren't, but they're ill and they want to blame something, and they fixated on the radio frequency fields. There was a study a few years ago that looked at a large number of people and took them into a place where they could apply fields that the person would know whether they were on or not. And they found about half of the people that said they were electrosensitive couldn't tell whether they were on or not, but the other half could, and the other half did have symptoms. So, but I had an experience, it was actually a legal case in California, of a man who was a technician and was hired to do a job for Verizon, went into a facility that had 9 radio frequency generators. And he had to repair them, and they were all supposed to be off. Well, 3 of them weren't off. And he sat right in front of them, of 2 of these, for a period of a little over an hour. And then he developed a terrible headache. He began to feel nauseous. He went out. They discovered that he had been exposed for this period of an hour, effectively being in a low-level microwave oven. He was in my office 2.5 years later. He had the most extraordinary degree of electrohypersensitivity I've ever seen. Constant headaches. Couldn't stand light, photophobia. Terrible weakness, terrible fatigue. And these are all the symptoms that people with electrohypersensitivity report. Now granted, you can be fatigued and you can have headaches for other reasons. But there is little question in my mind that this is a real syndrome, and that many people respond to being exposed to these fields with these rather non-specific syndromes. Now, it's interesting, and I've gotten very, very invested in a variety of different diseases that all have these same kinds of syndromes. Chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, multiple chemical sensitivity, Gulf War illness. I actually have a grant studying Gulf War illness. Some other diseases that have a lot in common. Now, the trigger in some cases may be chemicals, in other cases may be radio frequency fields. There's something very important and interesting that needs to be understood there, and it isn't understood at present. All right, I want to talk specifically about 2 things. I've mentioned cell phones. You can reduce your exposure by using a wired earpiece, keeping the cell phone off your body. Very important to do that. Especially important if you use it a lot. And people in various occupations, politicians particularly, tend to be on them all the time. And I've had too many people appear in my office having had surgery for brain cancer. Young people, lawyers, medical people. It's a tragic thing to have part of your brain cut out, and often you don't get it all. Let me talk about Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is is radio frequency fields, but it's at much lower intensity than most of the other things that we talk about. But the issue I've been concerned about is schools. Because if you have a Wi-Fi classroom with 30 kids in the room, each with a Wi-Fi laptop, and one big router upstairs, you're going to be in a hotbed of radio frequency fields. And one thing I didn't mention in the syndrome of electrohypersensitivity is mental dullness, poor memory. Well documented in blinded studies that have been done. The last thing you want in school where kids are supposed to be learning is anything, even though it may not be 100% documented, but you don't want anything that's going to reduce the ability of the child to learn. Let me talk about smart meters. Before that, let me say one other thing. There's still a lot of debate about what feature of all of these electromagnetic fields are dangerous. They don't come as pure sine waves, like everybody thinks they do. They come with transients, very high frequency transients. Many of the radio frequency waves have a carrier wave superimposed with high frequency waves. And increasing thought that it may not be the sine wave part, but rather these transients are what some people call dirty electricity. That's really important. And if that were the case, that might explain why not every study has shown as strong a results as other studies. But what are smart meters? Smart meters are meters that communicate from your residence to the utility that record your electrical usage. It used to be that you had an analog meter on the inside of the house and the utility had to send someone around to read it, or you had to fill a card that gave your electrical usage. Now it's transmitted with radio frequency radios to the utility. And although they use only a little of that information, it basically transmits 24/7. The nature of the transmission is unusual. It's different from most other sources of radio frequency waves because it's very high intensity but very brief pulses. So it's still, wiggling, but at very high intensity, multiple pulses over a period of about a second. And then at various intervals, some 20 seconds later, another big pulse. Well, from just the anecdotal reports, and again, it has not been really documented in a careful scientific type of study, but the reports of people suffering from electrohypersensitivity when smart meters are put in their house are they're growing day by day by day. And my suspicion, which certainly needs to be studied and proven, is it's this high frequency pulse, that it isn't just the sine waves, it's something about the nature of these pulses that's so important. There have not been studies of health effects from smart meters to date in the high quality peer-reviewed scientific literature. And this is always a problem. Health studies are expensive, they take a long time, it's very difficult to do the exposure assessment, and nobody is ever exposed to only one source of radio frequency radiation. So that's one of the reasons why there's so much controversy, so much being convinced by on the part of people who are electrosensitive that their smart meter is a problem, being skeptical on the part of the engineering and physics community. Now, most of the studies that have been done that have tried to document exposure average exposure over time. Well, if you have very brief pulses that occur at intervals, the average exposure may not be very great, but the health effects may be significant. So I think I should probably just stop there. And I don't know, do you want to take some questions now?
Here's my suggestion, if it's okay with you, because there's only one Dr. David Carpenter on the planet. If we could maybe do 3 questions, 3 or 4 questions now, then have the other 3 or 4 speakers speak, and then just for 5 or 6 minutes each, questions for everybody, and then the film. Is that okay if we could have, is that okay with everybody if we do 3 or 4 questions for Dr. Carpenter now?
4, 5, 6, or 7. Choose.
More than her.
You got a movie to watch.
Everybody's got questions before him. How many times do we get to?
Exactly. So, yeah,
Get your money's worth.
more than, more than 3 or 4 would be great. Also, speaking of get your money's worth.
You don't turn your lights
Well,
off.
no, don't kill me, but the, where is it? Here it is. It cost me $25 to rent this thing. Also, I would like to provide him a little bit of gasoline money coming from Albany and other things. So if anybody wants to donate, feel free to put it in there. All right, questions, Dr. Davenport.
Percentage of the population estimated to be suffering from hyperelectric sensitivity.
Well, it's certainly not clear. Some people say 1 to 2%. Some people say 10%. There's been a report, it's, again, total hypothesis, but arguing that the number of people suffering from electrohypersensitivity is growing so rapidly in conjunction with our increasing exposure to radio frequency fields, because they're everywhere, anticipating that it may be 50% of the population in 2050. My personal sense is it's probably down to the 1 to 2% now, at least people that pretty clearly have it. And you know, how do you determine that? There's been a very nice study of a single person, a female physician in Louisiana. It was taken into a laboratory with all the current brain imaging techniques. She didn't know whether the fields were on or off. When the fields were on, she got a headache, repeated enough times so it was statistically significant. When the fields were not on, she did not have headaches. Now that was a single case. That needs to be done with large numbers of people so you get statistically significant results as you would do for to investigate any disease. It's not easy.
Okay, but your sense is now it's 1 to 2%, possibly increasing with increased electromagnetic
Increased exposure. I mean, you can't go into a Starbucks or a Walmart or a McDonald's without being the Wi-Fi environment. Most people have a cell phone. The only people that don't are old people. I asked my class, I had a class of about 100 students, I asked them how many people had a landline, and it was only those people over 40. So, you know, it's the wireless way is the way we're going. The federal government, the state government are both pushing wireless technology and just don't seem to understand that there's a health risk.
Hi, Michelle Hertz.
Hi, Michelle.
My question is, would it be possible to get a university or a New York State university to study the microwave radiation from smart meters somehow? Do you think that there's a way we could get one of the universities in New York or anywhere? How could we get them interested to do a study, since the industry obviously won't, and we're hearing of so many people becoming ill after these meters are put into their homes?
The issue is totally money. And there is no way that at the present time the federal government is going to provide funds to do those kinds of studies. To do a proper study would probably require multi-million dollars, because the exposure assessment is so complicated. I'm working with a number of people that have contacts with wealthy individuals to see if we could do that. In terms of universities, everybody's interested in anything if there's the funding to do it. Now, this is not a priority for a lot of people, but it's totally an issue of funding. Yeah.
Would it be possible if you headlined a study, possibly there's so many smart meter activists across the country, perhaps we could organize a Kickstarter campaign and you could jumpstart it, and you could do it in increments. Like, how much would it be for a mini study? Maybe 300,000. We could go for that. then we could break it out. And then we get that much. That certainly indicts the industry, and perhaps it brings a lot of the naysayers in the science community, the physicists and the electricians, over to our side. Then perhaps, a technical university would say, well, yes, there's merit, and then the thing begins to swing rather than hit a home run. Try for, like
Well, I really totally agree with you. I think that's a logical approach. It is a complicated thing. If one focused specifically on smart meters, you would want to really have good documentation of what the fields are around smart meters. Some people have done that pretty well. To add the health effects part of that, it's really very complicated because you have to consider a person's total exposure to radio frequency fields. And the assessment of exposure is very complicated. I've been involved in many human health studies, not around electromagnetic fields, but you have to compare to people. You have to compare exposed people to unexposed people. How do you find an unexposed person? Maybe they don't have a smart meter, but how much time do they spend on their cell phone? So it isn't easy to do. But starting small with a defined goal, perhaps of characterizing the fields around smart meters, that would be certainly appropriate to do.
if something was started in that way, would you join?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm working toward that with these other funders. Now, my background is medicine, not the engineering. And so anything that I would be involved in, I could deal with the human health part, but the measurements of the field, that's someone else's.
And do you think that how much would be needed to get it to be a good goal for funding? How much is reasonable?
Well, the problem is it would be a lot. You said $300,000.
Is that reasonable?
No,
Million?
no, it's nowhere near reasonable. You're going to be, no, it might be reasonable for a very defined study of the nature of the fields from smart meters. There's some information there already. But if you try to couple that with the human health effects, the kind of study that I would envision would be to take people into a laboratory, take people that say they're electrosensitive and people that are not, to have a generator that generates smart meter fields, and expose people to them, but not have them realize whether the fields are on at all.
That's interesting.
Well, that's one of the problems. That's one of the problems. And as a matter of fact, Magda Havet was trying to do that, and her university's institutional review board asked me about it because she has already demonstrated some heart irregularities when people are exposed to these things. So how do you do the study if you're pretty convinced that there are adverse health effects? Is it ethical to do those studies? But then, if that study isn't ethical, how do you get the information?
And guinea pigs don't work.
Guinea pigs don't work.
But do you feel like people are dying living next to smart meters?
I can't answer that question.
Like instant, if you're saying they couldn't.
I don't know of any evidence that people have died of arrhythmias because they went near the smart meter. But on the other hand, it wouldn't surprise me if they did. Yeah.
Yeah, question. We know the studies have been done with CAT scans and equivalent, from Hiroshima at a certain point, 20, whatever. But what about magnetic resonance imagery? That's using magnetic fields. Supposedly that's safe, but is it really
No,
safe?
it's not safe.
And what are
And it's interesting, just today, I got a reprint of a study that looked at cognitive function of people in MRI machines. And what they found was that cognitive function was reduced, which is a fairly immediate effect. But it was dependent on a combination of the static or the DC magnetic field with the MLI superimposed on it. It's very interesting that the medical community has never wanted to have a study done. The people that are most at risk are the technicians, because they're there day in and day out. If you have a scan, it's usually because there's some reason to have it. But the people that are administering it are the ones that are exposed day in and day out.
I have a question more relevant to a lot of stuff on our side here. We have this big controversy over this 345 volt lines going down. And we say they're a problem, okay, because it's square the distance to the EMF running down. And, you know, the height goes up, the distance comes in, the height comes down, the distance goes up. If you bury it, then, you know, they're typically talking about 4 feet, something like that, and twisting the wires so that the fields counteract each other, and then they got to put some sort of container around it. Some say you put nitrogen in there, you put whatever.
Used to be you put PCBs in there.
Whatever you put in there, okay? Now, what's the argument that we can use that would support pretty fundamental ideas saying, look, we know it's going to cost a little bit, but it really is better for everybody concerned by burying it, okay? Now, we've gone through cost studies where, you know, the Iroquois gas line went through here, and we know it costs $1 million a mile, okay? So we have some ballpark of what it is, but they don't want to hear that because that's dollars. Is there a medical way that we can attack this?
Well, I think there is, in the sense that, without question, the buried power line, whether it's high voltage or not, is not going to generate significant magnetic fields. Let people think about the cost when they get sued because of the leukemia that the child gets or the brain cancer that the adult gets. And that's really the only argument. You know, I think I probably better stop here. You're never going to get anyone else to talk or ever see that.
I just have one last quick question, if I may, so I understand. When was the last time that a study was done on EMFs on power lines? How long ago was it?
Well, there's certainly been studies within the last year, but they haven't been, they've been mostly in Europe. And they've been mostly funded by the industry. And surprise, a lot of them don't find anything. You can always not find anything if you try hard enough.
They're published?
Yes.
Okay.
And I've got
But
good.
in this country and non-industry, how long ago? So was it 1979 the last time?
No, that was the first one in 1979. In the mid-90s, there were a number of studies. There was a big study in California, probably 92. But there hasn't been any funding in the U.S. for those studies for a long time.
Interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? I was just going to say I don't mean to steal the thunder completely of the film, which Dr. Carpenter is in. You hear Michelle Hertz's voice, but I'm going to steal the thunder a little bit. Dr. Henry Lai, who's right on the bioinitiative.org report, part of the film, 70% of the industry-funded studies about EMF, right, electromagnetic frequency radiation, 70% of the time, there's no problem. They don't find a problem. 70% of the non-industry funded studies about EMF radiation, they found a problem. And I think that's kind of across the board maybe for all the issues.
Shown by others as well, same thing.
The other thing I was going to say is I don't mean to jump on board this bandwagon too quickly, but I personally am sort of leaping inside my heart to help you and Weston or Raji or whoever launch a Kickstarter. Nobody gets the money until the whole thing is reached. Indiegogo.com, even if you reach half the goal, you get the money. So, and there's a lot of people in this room who are way more qualified on this issue. So, Wes, Raji, Steve, if Michelle, if one of you guys does not launch an Indiegogo campaign, on this in the next week, I will do it. But one of you guys could do it.
We're going to probably reach out to Josh.
I would also just have some advice on that. I think it would be wise if you do raise funds, to have it be a competitive. Don't just select one person, me or anyone else. So have it be competitive, so that different scientists can come up with ideas how best to do it. And then get a good committee to review those proposals. First of all, it has a lot more credibility if it's done that way than if it looks like you're just siphoning money to your friends. Secondly, you may get some really good ideas that other people haven't thought of. But I would totally support efforts to raise funds. It's just, wouldn't want you to underestimate how expensive this kind of study could be.
Well, I think it would capture the imagination. I mean, all of these smart meter activists have been toiling away. And, you know, we talk to our congressmen, we talk to our senators, they brush us off, they even want to hear about it. And most famously, our assembly person for this district, Cahill, he's a smart meter activist. We've tried to reach him, and I mean, this is one of the hotbeds for the anti-smart meter movement, and he just blithely goes on, like there's no problem, we can't reach him, so.
He's pushing.
He's pushing it. Yeah, so, I would like to come from left field and capture the imagination and go for it. There are.
The other thing I should shut up, but you know, it's going to get worse because Zigbee drives are being put in every new manufactured appliance. So they're going to be communicating in your house to the smart meter. It's going to make your kitchen and your laundry room a hotbed of RF, continuously going to the smart meter. The smart meters benefit the utility, they don't benefit the individual. The utility will have the ability to shut off your washer and your clothes dryer when they want to. They'll have the ability to charge you more for doing your laundry at 3 in the afternoon as compared to 3 in the morning. It benefits them, doesn't benefit the consumer.
The other thing that benefits them by, they don't have to pay somebody to drive around the countryside.
Well, they can fire all the meter readers.
They can do that, but they still don't reduce the rate.
The rate's going to go up.
Yeah. So they save money by not paying people and they let the rates go up.
Yeah, quick question, tiny one. What about the inverters on solar panels? What do they produce?
I don't know the answer.
They generate dirty electricity. We've tested it.
I measured it, they do.
A lot of
generate
dirty
microwave.
electricity.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, there's a radio frequency component even to power line feeds. So
The
to keep it
inverters
free.
have the switching mode power support. That's why they did it.
I haven't really been informed about that. Deny it.
Any other questions for Dr. Carpenter before we go to the other speakers? I know,
Raji Nevin, I live in Woodstock, New York, and I'll just briefly touch on my personal story and why I got involved in this issue of smart meters. And I live with Steve Bromline, he's my partner. I moved into Steve's house about 2 years ago, and shortly after I moved in, I started to get very ill with all the symptoms you spoke of. I also had a lot of dizziness and vertigo to the point where I would stand up and almost fall over. I've always been healthy my whole life. I had no idea what was going on. I've always been very good at sort of self-diagnosing any kind of health issues and taking care of them very easily in the past. And I could not figure out why I was sick, and it got progressively worse over time. And eventually, accidentally, spoke with a neighbor of ours, a friend of Steve's, who talked to us about the smart meter issue. We knew nothing about smart meters. We didn't know what they were. And he told us his symptoms, and at that time I didn't make the connection, and we just thought, well, poor guy, and then we kind of moved on. And within a 2-week period, we had 2 more people come to us to talk to us about smart meters. And so we started doing our own research. I should say that Steve is a kind of a lifelong activist. I've never been an activist. And I am an activist on this issue simply because I had the personal experience and I felt I needed to help raise awareness. So to make a long story short, we did discover that we had a smart meter on the house. Steve wasn't aware of it because they don't tell you that they're coming to install it, and once it's installed, they don't tell you they've installed it. So there's really very little awareness about this. In fact, a lot of people would just say, what's a smart meter? What difference does it make? So once we found out we had one, and I found out by writing down the model number and the manufacturer name, and I Googled it, and it came up GE in the smart meter family. Then I looked at Steve and said, wow, we have one of these, and I have all these symptoms, and I haven't been able to figure out what's wrong with me. And it was getting pretty difficult to function at that point. I was sick a lot. I went from being sick every once in a while to sick very often. So we started writing to the utility company with legalese language, return receipt letters telling them that we had to have our analog restored, and we gave them a certain amount of time. And we sent 3 different sets of these letters, and we got completely ignored by the utility company. They never called us back. They never wrote us back. It was just a blank slate. And so eventually what sort of was a straw that broke the camel's back was that I was standing about 10 feet from the meter one day, and I was talking to Steve about something that I was cooking, and I couldn't say a certain word. It was garlic, actually. It came out as gibberish when I was trying to describe some ingredients, and I'd never had anything like this happen. I could hear the word in my mind, but it wouldn't come out of my mouth. It was like, ugh. And I tried to say it several times, and then I looked at him and I thought, that's very odd. So I went into the house and I kept cooking, and I was a little bit scared at that point, thinking, why can't I say that word? And then Steve came in and looked at me and said, what's going on? And when I started to speak, every single word out of my mouth was gibberish. And then I had sort of collapsed on my bed. I couldn't function, I couldn't think. And Steve had left the house, but halfway down our driveway, he sort of got a strong idea that said she could be having a stroke. I didn't know anything about strokes. I didn't have any history of high blood pressure or cholesterol or any of that. In fact, I had a very clean bill of health. And he came back and gave me aspirin. I was in the hospital for 2.5 days. They ran extensive tests on me. They did say I had a mini stroke. They call it a TIA. And they said I was at risk for a full-blown stroke. And so when I was released, and the doctors were intrigued because from all the tests they ran, from taking my blood to an MRI to an EEG to running scans on my throat arteries, my heart arteries, they said everything was completely clear. I was in better health than most people they'd seen my age, and they didn't understand why I had this stroke. So they let me go. We went home and we did some more research. By this time we had done tons of research on the issue, trying to educate ourselves and then raise awareness for other people. And we did find a lot of research from others who had documented that a lot of people had had strokes from these meters on their house. And people had pacemakers that interfered with those. And we only did, we didn't do extensive research. We just started reading about it online, going, this is a connection here. So at that point, we decided not to take a risk of a full-blown stroke, and Steve actually very carefully took that, the smart meter off our home, and we had ordered a safe analog meter, and we restored our analog meter ourselves. We videotaped it. We sent another last letter to the utility company telling them why, and telling them we are acting in self-defense because you're not taking care of this issue for us. In fact, they're not even responding. And the meter was working, and we videotaped it to show them that the analog was working. There was nothing wrong with the analog. We weren't trying to steal electricity. And 4 days later, the utility company came out with no notice, no phone call, and a big pair of clippers, and they clipped our wires. and we've been without electricity since, which was about 15 months ago. And that turned out to be, oddly enough, a blessing in disguise, because I started to get better, and I had a lot of what appeared to be nerve damage. I managed to heal that and have been better ever since. Steve had some issues that he didn't connect to this meter, which was a extremely stiff neck and problems with his knees. He thought it was related to Lyme, and when he removed the meter, he was taking ibuprofen every day to function. When we removed the meter, his symptoms completely went away. So that was enough proof for both of us that the meter was the issue. And since then, we've just been trying to raise awareness and seeing that Central Hudson, who recently got bought out by Fortis, a major company in Canada that owns other utility companies in the US, they do have an agenda to put these meters on at least 90%, if not more, of homes and businesses all over the US, and they're doing this in other countries as well. They're doing some strong-arming tactics, bringing state police with them to install the meters. They're breaking people's locks to get into their homes. They're breaking gates. And we've seen some of this personally. And there's been a lot of information given out that in fact is not truthful, and we've proven that. The odd thing about it, which should raise red flags for people, is that simultaneously this is being done all over the US and in other countries. And there's a strong agenda to get these on the homes. One issue I wanted to bring up about the testing for the health issues, and I know Dr. Carpenter had said that you need to get the person who claims to be electrosensitive out of that type of environment. The problem with the smart meters is you can't get out of the environment. They're 24/7. These pulsing spikes happen 24/7. It's happening while you're asleep. And from what we've researched, and correct me if I'm wrong, the body is most sensitive and vulnerable to this type of radiation while you're sleeping. A lot of people get these meters placed right on the other side of their bedrooms. That's where mine was, right on the other side of my head where I slept. And you don't know about it. So it's very insidious in a way, the way that they're handling it, just because it's such a stealth method. And at this point, we're just trying to find ways to raise awareness so that more people can help us fight the issue.
Could you give us the website for your group?
The website is StopSmartMetersWoodstockNY.org.
One more time.
Stop Smart Meters, WoodstockNY.org. .com, sorry.
And what the handout that I gave with the brochure and the Take Action paper, you'll see it. I gave a small brochure and a Take Action page. That's all I ask you to do. Please read it, please do it, contact your legislators, although they're not behaving very well. We've been probably getting, I think, they're getting donations from a lot of utility companies, so they're not really listening, but they have to hear from us, so please just take a look at the Take Action page and call your elected officials. Thank you.
Michelle, give us a website to go to.
www.stopsmartmetersny.org.
Kotler here in the town of Clinton, co-founder of NoMonsterPowerlines.com.
In deference to everyone's desire to watch this movie, I will make this very short, except I will say that I found your talk fascinating. Thank you so much. Your story, where are you? You're unbelievable. I had no idea. And it is the yin and the yang of the fight that we fight between the power lines and the smart meters and the whole convulsion, if you will, of the way electricity is delivered, measured, rationed, produced, generated, and sourced, that we are going through. If anyone is watching on PBS, which I know you're not because you have no power at home, the story about the Roosevelts that's going on right now, there's a whole documentary about the Roosevelts. I'm watching that with this incredible fascination about what an exciting time the turn of the century was, when we moved from the 19th century to the 20th century, and what vitality and what smart people and what interesting battles were being fought, and how old paradigms were being let go of with great resistance as new ways, more modern ways of being came into the fore. And the relevance here is that what I learned in working with the power lines is that Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison were both born in 1897. They're both part of this sort of transition into that new generation. And in the 1930s, the power lines out here were erected. I don't know when the first telephone came into Clinton, but I can tell you this, that if Alexander Graham Bell walked through that door today, and if Thomas Edison also walked through that door today, Bell would say, I have no idea what that wireless thing is in your hand and how much the telecommunications business has changed, whereas Thomas Edison would feel totally and completely at home because it has scarcely changed at all. They're still out there, the 1930s. And the new version looks just like that. The point of that is that what we are living through right now is a paradigm shift. We need the Teddy Roosevelts of the world. We need to charge up the hill. We need to fight these fights because the old way of doing business is going to be very reluctant to let go of how they're doing it. And we do, this is all linked to needing new sources of energy, to wean ourselves from dependence on fossil fuel, to, climate change. There are a million bigger and bigger issues that we can attach this to because we are part of a paradigm shift. We're just a little part of that, each one of us. We're one little voice. I represent no monster power lines in this room. You represent smartphones. And Ray represents the town of Clinton. But each one of us together, as we link hands and sing Kumbaya, are going to make a difference because we are not going to give up. We are not going to give up. We are going to become the biggest irritation that Fortis, National Grid, Central Hudson ever met in their life. Cuomo. Here, the Democratic primaries of last week and how well Ms. Teachout did, and if anything was to send a message to Cuomo that all is not happy in the Hudson Valley, at least he knows there must be some issue that the Democrats are unhappy with because it sort of really showed up clearly. At any rate, I thank you all for staying involved in the power lines. We are in the midst of a very successful campaign with a petition whose goal right now, our first level of a goal is 10,000 signatures. We are halfway there. We are going to get to that 10,000 before Election Day. We are going to come to Albany, and we are going to meet with Governor and our legislators and make sure that they know that power, it belongs to the people. We want our power back, don't we? We're going to take our power back, and we're going to take it back with our voices and our votes.
Further support, Sharon. I mean, we've worked closely for many, many years, months on this anyways. It feels like years. And we're really pushing the petition because we did one in January and we got Cuomo's attention and he said, you know, we're going to keep them within the perimeter of the towers as they exist, no wider. And then we added, thanks to Sharon, the thought of no higher, because that's eminent domain above whatever it is. You know, even though it's not land, it's still stuff. So we're keeping the pressure on them. Everything is stopped at the moment. We're waiting to see what the PSC is going to do. So even though it's in limbo, doesn't mean it's gone or solved. And we're just pushing, so that's it.
Meters still work.
I don't know.
It's still using power.
Yeah, it has its internal
And it
power.
still could be, there's, the neutral line is still a problem in this issue, so.
Yeah.
So yes, they still use power. They
Will
still.
I be protected? Can I protect myself by doing that?
No.
Some of the radiation?
No, because it's just like the regular electric meter. The meter is directly tied to the wires out on the road. After the meter, it goes to your circuit breaker box. The only way you can turn that meter off is cut the wire going to it from the power lines. You can't stop it afterwards because you just go out and look and you'll see the meters, something's going to be happening. You may use a little bit, but it's going to keep on doing its thing. So yeah, you got to cut it out there, and don't get caught
Then they'll
doing that, they
probably
get
power off
excited.
their-
They may do the same thing that happened there.